He was moments away from saying "I do" to the wrong woman until a little girl burst into the chapel and shouted, "She's not the one." What came next unraveled 6 years of lies and changed everything. The sun poured through the tall stained glass windows of the historic St. Augustine Chapel, casting warm, colored light over rows of carefully arranged white roses and gold-trimmed chairs. The soft notes of a string quartet drifted through the air, delicate and elegant, just like the scene unfolding at the altar. Alex Carter stood tall and poised, dressed in a custom-tailored white wedding suit with a subtle silver pattern along the lapels. His dark brown hair was perfectly styled, and his blue eyes scanned the guests with a distant calm, though underneath, a storm of emotions brewed: anticipation, pride, and something he couldn't quite name. The bride, Bella Moore, made her entrance moments ago in a dazzling white gown, the kind of dress that shimmered with every breath she took. Her long blonde hair was pinned into a loose, elegant bun, and her smile was picture perfect. Every photographer in the room captured the way she held Alex's hand as she reached the altar, the way their fingers locked as if everything in their world was secure. Bella radiated confidence and satisfaction, as though this wedding was not only a union but a personal victory. After all, she had fought for this moment. She had waited, maneuvered, endured, and now here they were, about to seal a future she had envisioned for years. Guests whispered excitedly among themselves. The media hadn't been invited, but a few recognizable faces from the tech and fashion worlds dotted the pews. Some close colleagues of Alex's sat quietly, respectful and formal. A few, though, exchanged hesitant glances, the kind of subtle concern only those with long memories carried. They remembered Emma. They remembered the sudden breakup 6 years ago, the rumors, the silence, and how fast Bella had stepped into the empty space Emma left behind. But time had passed, and now, with Alex's billion-dollar company reaching global fame and Bella's name attached to his every public appearance, most had forgotten or chosen not to ask questions. Alex's thoughts drifted back, briefly and unwillingly, to a different time 6 years earlier, when he had stood in a much smaller room, holding Emma's hand. No photographers, no string quartet, just two people who believed in each other. Emma's eyes had been soft and honest, and he used to trust them more than anything in the world. But then Bella had come to him with trembling hands and a heartbroken face, showing him messages, photos, things he couldn't unsee, accusations of betrayal, of disloyalty. And Emma, she had begged him to listen, but in his fury, he couldn't. He had turned his back on her. Now, standing at this grand altar with Bella beside him, the past seemed far away, distant enough to bury. Or so he thought. The priest stepped forward, clearing his throat gently as the music faded. He opened the ceremonial book and smiled at the couple. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander Carter and Bella Moore in holy matrimony." The words rolled on, but Alex barely heard them. Something tugged at the edge of his awareness, a quiet voice deep inside that told him something was off, not wrong. Exactly. But unsettled. Still, he smiled. He looked at Bella. He held her hand a little tighter. And the ceremony continued, blissfully unaware of what was about to change everything. Just as the priest took a small pause and turned the page of his ceremonial book, preparing to recite the sacred vows, a sudden, sharp sound cut through the air like glass shattering in the middle of a symphony. It wasn't loud in the traditional sense, but it carried a weight that pulled every eye in the chapel toward its source. A small voice, clear and trembling, yet defiant, rang out from the back of the room, "She's not the one for you." For a moment, silence fell like a heavy curtain. The musicians froze mid-note, and the priest looked up, startled. Guests twisted in their seats, craning their necks toward the voice, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Even Bella's fingers, tightly clasped around Alex's hand, twitched slightly, her nails pressing harder into his skin. Alex's eyes widened as he instinctively turned to see who had spoken, and what he saw made his breath catch in his chest. There, just inside the arched doorway of the chapel, stood a little girl in a pale yellow dress, her dark brown hair tumbling in gentle waves past her shoulders. She looked no more than 6 years old, and her small fists were clenched at her sides. Her eyes, bright and stormy blue, were filled with unshed tears and a stubborn strength that seemed far too mature for someone so young. Behind her stood a woman, quiet, tense, almost afraid to move. Her long auburn hair was pinned back in a simple twist, and though she wore no makeup and dressed plainly in a modest navy dress, her presence seemed to eclipse the entire room. It was Emma. Alex stared as if he were seeing a ghost. His mind raced to make sense of what was unfolding, but the rest of the room faded. Bella turned toward him, her grip now iron on his wrist, and whispered through clenched teeth, "What is she doing here?" But he didn't answer. His entire body was frozen, not from fear or anger, but from something deeper, a tidal wave of emotions crashing against the walls he had spent years building. The little girl, the one who had dared to interrupt the wedding, stood her ground. Her chin lifted slightly as she met Alex's gaze, and for the briefest second, something passed between them. It wasn't recognition in the conscious sense, but something raw and instinctual. Alex's breath became shallow as he looked from the girl to Emma and back again, his mind suddenly clicking pieces together, pieces he had buried and forgotten or perhaps refused to ever acknowledge. Emma gently stepped forward and placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Lily," she whispered. But the girl didn't move. She kept her gaze fixed on Alex, her small chest rising and falling quickly. Emma looked up at Alex, her expression unreadable, a mixture of fear, sorrow, and something else entirely, something that made his chest tighten painfully. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the guests. No one knew what to do, least of all the priest, who stood awkwardly to the side, glancing back and forth between the couple at the altar and the dramatic interruption unfolding in the aisle. The moment seemed to stretch on endlessly. Bella's face was draining of color, her perfectly composed expression cracking ever so slightly. She hissed again, this time louder. "Alex, say something. Tell them to leave." But Alex didn't move. His eyes remained locked on Emma. There was so much he wanted to ask, but no words came. Memories were flooding back now, the way Emma used to look at him when no one else believed in his dreams, the late nights working on his first product while she brought him coffee and encouragement, the letters she'd written when he traveled, and then the look on her face that day, the day he accused her without letting her speak, the way her eyes filled with disbelief and silent heartbreak. He had walked away from her convinced he was right, convinced he had been betrayed. And now here she was, 6 years later, standing before him with a child who had his eyes, his expression, his fire. His heart pounded so hard he could barely hear anything around him. Emma spoke softly, her voice barely carrying across the silent chapel. "We didn't come here to cause a scene," she said. She needed to say what she felt." She looked down at Lily with a tender but trembling hand on her back. "I told her it wasn't our place, but she insisted." Lily turned to her mother briefly and then looked back at Alex. Her voice was smaller this time, but still steady. "You're not supposed to marry her," she said. "You're supposed to be with Mommy." Everything stopped. No one breathed. Bella finally let go of Alex's hand, her arm dropping to her side like it weighed 100 pounds. Her eyes darted from Emma to Lily to Alex, silently calculating, unraveling, panicking. The veil of perfection she had so carefully crafted over years began to slip. Alex took a small step forward, uncertain, unsteady, but unable to stay still. His voice cracked as he tried to speak. "Emma, is she?" Emma didn't answer. She looked at him with a sadness, so heavy it felt like it could pull the entire chapel into silence forever. She gently led Lily by the hand and turned to go. But something inside Alex shifted. He took another step forward, this time faster. "Wait," he said, louder. "Please, don't go." And though the ceremony wasn't over, though the flowers and guests and camera flashes were waiting, though Bella still stood at the altar, something far more important had just begun. Alex stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, his breath shallow, his pulse racing in his ears like waves crashing against a cliff. Behind him, the priest called his name softly, uncertain whether to continue or call the whole thing off. Bella hadn't moved from the altar, but the heat of her anger radiated through the chapel like a silent scream. The guests, uncomfortable and confused, whispered behind their hands, some avoiding eye contact entirely, others staring at the child as if she were a ghost from another life. But Alex didn't care about the guests, or the music, or the photographs. All he could focus on was the way Emma had just looked at him like someone who had carried a weight for years, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally matter. She was already halfway down the chapel steps with Lily when he spoke again, this time with more urgency, the cracks in his voice now fully exposed. "Emma, please," he said, louder, clearer. "Don't leave. Not like this." Emma hesitated at the edge of the gravel path that led into the garden behind the chapel. Lily clutched her hand tightly, but her small face turned once more toward Alex, her blue eyes watchful, almost hopeful, as if she too was waiting to see what he would do next. Emma slowly turned around. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at him for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her words were calm but edged with exhaustion. "Why now, Alex? Why care now?" "I don't know," he admitted, stepping closer, completely unaware of the silence still gripping the guests inside. "Maybe because I saw her eyes. Maybe because I've been running from the truth for 6 years. Or maybe because you're the only person I ever really trusted and I let someone else destroy that." Emma's mouth tightened slightly and her fingers brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice dropped. "You let someone else destroy me, Alex. And you didn't even ask if it was true." Her tone wasn't angry, it was worse than that. It was weary. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Only it had never quite looked like this. Never so public. Never with her daughter watching. "I was young," he said quietly. "I was stupid. I was angry. And I was scared." She gave a short laugh, dry and sad. "You weren't scared, Alex. You were proud. And your pride mattered more than I did." He couldn't argue with that. It was true. 6 years ago, he had looked at a few manipulated photos and half-read messages, and instead of listening to his Emma, he had turned away. He had believed Bella because the lies fit the insecurities he didn't want to admit, and once the accusation left his mouth, once the damage was done, it had been easier to keep walking than to face the mess he'd made. He knelt down slowly to Lily's height, his hands shaking slightly as he looked into her face. "What's your name?" he asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. She tilted her head curiously, clearly trying to decide if she could trust him. "Lily," she said softly, gripping her mother's fingers more tightly. He swallowed. "How old are you?" 6, she answered, then added, almost shyly, "My birthday's in April." April. That would make her conception just months before everything fell apart. He looked up at Emma, his heart hammering in his chest. She nodded once, barely perceptible, but it was enough. The truth hit him all at once, not just the fact that he had a daughter, but the knowledge that she had been growing up without him, living a life he never even knew existed, laughing, crying, learning, and becoming her own person while he was out building his empire and pretending to be whole. Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I didn't keep her from you to punish you, Alex. I tried to reach out once. But when I saw how happy you looked in the press with Bella, I stopped. I wasn't going to drag Lily into something toxic. I had to protect her. I had to protect myself." He looked down. He had no defense. There were no excuses, no noble reasons to offer. Only guilt. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone," he said quietly. "And I should have known. I should have." His voice broke, and he couldn't finish the sentence. Emma reached out and touched Lily's back gently. "She's smart. She watches everything." When she saw the wedding in the news, she asked questions. "I didn't want to bring her here, but she insisted. I thought maybe she'd regret it." But now, she trailed off and looked at Alex, her eyes softer now, more tired than angry. Lily looked between the two adults, then whispered, "Mommy, can we talk to him more? Not here, but later?" Emma hesitated for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "But only if it's really what you want, Alex. I won't let you hurt her the way you hurt me. One mistake, and we disappear for good." Alex looked at both of them, the woman he had once loved with everything he had, and the little girl he had never known he needed until this moment, and felt something inside him begin to shift. He had spent years building his life around success, ambition, and image, but none of that felt real anymore, not compared to this. "I want to talk," he said. "Not just once. Not just to make things right. I want to know her. And I want to try to make things right with you, too. If you'll let me." Emma didn't smile. Not yet. But she gave the smallest nod. "We'll see," she said. And with that, they turned and walked away from the chapel, leaving behind the flowers, the music, the silence, and Bella still standing alone in her perfect white dress, watching everything fall apart. The sun had already begun to dip lower in the sky by the time Alex returned to the chapel. The garden behind the building was now empty, the guests slowly dispersing after the chaos, whispering quietly in groups, their curiosity barely hidden behind polite nods and glances. The wedding that was supposed to be the pinnacle of his personal and public life had unraveled in a matter of minutes. And at the center of it all stood the truth he had refused to face for years. He walked through the corridor behind the altar, away from the stairs, and opened the side door to a private lounge reserved for the bride and groom. Inside, Bella was already waiting. She stood near the window with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her veil thrown aside on the back of a chair. Her makeup, though still mostly intact, now looked heavy and cold under the harsh indoor lighting. She didn't turn around when he entered, but he felt the tension in the room wrap around him like a rope pulling taut. "You just left," she said flatly, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard it. "You walked out in the middle of our wedding, Alex." He shut the door behind him gently and leaned against it for a moment, trying to gather the right words, knowing none of them would come out clean. "I needed to talk to her." Bella let out a humorless laugh and finally turned to face him. "Talk to her? Are you serious? After everything she did to you?" "To us? She walks in here with some child, and suddenly the last 6 years mean nothing to you." "She didn't do anything to me," Alex replied, his tone low but steady. "You did." For a brief second, Bella blinked as if she hadn't heard him correctly. Her brows tightened. "Excuse me?" Alex took a slow breath, then stepped farther into the room. "You lied, Bella. You lied about Emma. You told me she cheated on me. You showed me messages, photos, things that convinced me to leave her. But it was never true, was it?" Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She shifted her weight, her arms falling to her sides. I was protecting you." "I don't," he said firmly. "Don't insult me like that. I believed you because I wanted to believe you, because it was easier than facing my own insecurities. But I need to hear the truth from you now. Did you lie?" Bella's voice trembled with a mix of defensiveness and desperation. "I didn't make it up. I just exaggerated what I saw. She was close to that guy, always texting him, meeting him after work. You were so blinded by her, I thought you deserved to know." Alex stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You exaggerated. You took photos out of context, created a story, and fed it to me like poison, knowing I would swallow it, because I trusted you. And when I walked away from her when she tried to explain, you stood there and said nothing. For 6 years, you let me believe she betrayed me." Bella's voice rose now, her composure starting to crack. "Because I loved you. I've always loved you." "And you," she stopped, her voice catching. "You never looked at me the way you looked at her. Not once. Do you know how that feels? To be second in everything? Second in your eyes, second in your heart, even when I was the one who stayed." Alex felt a hollow ache rise in his chest. There had been moments when he had wondered why things with Bella always felt slightly off, why their connection lacked the unspoken understanding he once had with Emma. But he had pushed those doubts aside, focusing instead on stability, convenience, shared ambition. Love, he thought, would follow. Now, hearing Bella admit what she had done, he understood why that love never came. "You didn't love me," he said, more sad than angry. "You wanted to win. You didn't care who you had to step on to do it." She looked wounded, her lips trembling, her eyes glossing with tears she didn't want him to see. "That's not fair." "No, it isn't," he said quietly. "None of this is fair. You manipulated me, Bella. You took something real and turned it into a lie. And because of that, I lost 6 years with the woman I loved and with a daughter I didn't even know existed." Bella stepped back like he had struck her. "You're going to leave me for her? After all this time?" "I'm not leaving you for her," he said. "I'm walking away from a life built on deception. I don't know what's going to happen with Emma. She might never forgive me. But I owe it to her, and to Lily, to try. And I owe it to myself to stop living in a lie." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the ornate clock on the wall. Bella's tears finally spilled over, but she wiped them away quickly, her jaw clenched. "You don't get to walk out and play the victim, Alex. You let it happen." He nodded slowly. "I did. I take responsibility for that. But I'm done pretending. I have a daughter, Bella. A little girl who looked me in the eye and told me I was with the wrong person. And for the first time in years, I believed it. She's not just a reminder of the past. She's a chance to be better than I was." Bella turned away from him, her shoulders stiff. There was nothing else to say. The silence between them now wasn't tense, it was final. Alex walked to the door, his heart heavy but clear for the first time in a long time. As he opened it, he glanced back at the woman he had nearly married, her figure silhouetted in the fading light. She didn't turn around, and he didn't expect her to. He stepped out into the hallway, each footstep echoing through the empty space. The wedding was over. The illusion was broken. And ahead of him, for the first time in years, waited something real. The days that followed were heavy and disorienting. The media, though not invited to the wedding, had quickly picked up the story once guests began leaking details: tech giants, wedding ends in scandal, runaway bridegroom faces paternity shock, old flame returns with secret child. Alex tried not to look at the headlines, but they were everywhere, in every whispered conversation, in every shift of attention when he entered a room. He canceled meetings, postponed public appearances, and handed over day-to-day control of the company to a COO. For the first time in years, he disconnected from the life he had so carefully built because he needed space to breathe space. He retreated to the cabin he owned in upstate New York, a quiet place he hadn't visited since the early days of the company, when stress relief had meant hiking in the cold, chopping wood, making coffee over a gas stove instead of pouring it from a machine in a luxury suite. The first night there, he didn't sleep. He sat on the wooden porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars and thinking about everything he had lost and everything he had blindly accepted as true. He thought about Emma's eyes when she looked at him outside the chapel, not bitter, not hateful, but tired, like someone who had carried too much for too long. He thought about Lily's voice, the small but powerful way she had stood in front of a room full of adults and told him he was making a mistake. In the silence of the mountains, memories began to return, not the ones twisted by betrayal and pride, but the real ones, the late nights in their first apartment, when Emma would sit cross-legged on the kitchen counter and talk with him about the future while he typed away on his laptop. The way she always left little notes for him on the fridge, even when they fought. The morning she bought him a suit for his first investor meeting, pinning the sleeves herself because they were too long. And the way she looked at him, always seeing more than just who he was in the moment, always believing in who he could become. He had once promised her the world, and when that world began to materialize, he had shut her out of it. The guilt was overwhelming, not just for what he had done to Emma, but for the years he had missed with Lily. He wondered what her first words had been, whether she liked cartoons or nature documentaries, whether she had ever asked where her father was and why he wasn't there. That thought hit the hardest. She hadn't just lost a father, she had grown up believing she didn't have one at all, or worse, that he hadn't wanted her. And in a way, he hadn't. He had made a choice, based on lies, and let it stand for 6 years. By the 4th day, he started writing. He filled page after page of a notebook with letters. He didn't know if he would ever send letters to Emma, to Lily, to himself. He wrote down things he had never said out loud, things that embarrassed him, things that made him cry when he read them back. He wrote about fear, how afraid he had been of losing control, of being made a fool, of loving someone so much that it terrified him. And he wrote about hope, too, however fragile it felt. He realized that the empire he had built, the image he had maintained, the reputation he had defended, none of it would matter if he couldn't look his daughter in the eyes and show her he was more than the man who disappeared. He had to earn that chance, not demand it. He had to show Emma that he wasn't just back out of guilt or nostalgia. He had to prove that he had changed. So he made a plan. Not a grand gesture or some dramatic declaration, but something real. He called his assistant and asked her to send everything Lily might need: a collection of children's books, art supplies, puzzles, even a beginner's science kit. He had no idea what she liked, but he was willing to try everything. Then he reached out to Emma. His message was simple. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to see Lily. He only wrote, "I'm ready to listen. Whenever you're ready to talk." He waited. Days passed. Then a week. Then 10 days. He began to think maybe she would never respond and he wouldn't blame her. But on the 11th day, a message came. Just a line. "Come by Saturday, noon. Don't be late." And just like that, a door had opened. Not wide, Not enough to walk through without caution, but enough to glimpse what might still be waiting on the other side. Saturday came with a heavy gray sky and a steady drizzle that blurred the edges of the city as Alex drove through the familiar streets of Brooklyn. It had been years since he had visited this part of town, years since the days he and Emma had lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a noisy bakery that made the entire block smell like warm cinnamon. Now, the neighborhoods were cleaner, more polished, and yet something about the streets still hummed with the same kind of quiet life they once shared. He parked half a block away from the address Emma had sent and sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the modest brownstone with its chipped steps and flower pots on the windowsills. His heart was pounding, not from nerves in the business sense. This wasn't a deal, not a presentation, but from the terrifying awareness that what waited behind that door could change everything. When he finally made himself get out and walk up the stairs, he hesitated one last time before ringing the bell. The sound echoed faintly inside, and a moment later he heard light footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, and there she was, Emma. She looked different but also the same in a way that startled him. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, and she wore jeans and a loose sweater, no makeup, but there was a calm strength about her now that hadn't been there before. Her expression was guarded but not unkind. She didn't smile. She didn't invite him in immediately. She just looked at him like she was trying to measure how much of the man she once knew still lived inside the person standing in front of her. "You're on time," she said, stepping aside. He gave a small, unsure nod. "You asked me not to be late." He walked into a small but warm living room filled with books, scattered toys, and soft blankets draped over the couch. There was a gentle scent of lavender in the air, and something else, maybe vanilla. On the coffee table sat a child's coloring book, half finished, and a pair of tiny sneakers lay tossed near the edge of a reading rug. It was lived in, it was real, and it hit him like a wave of everything he had missed. "Lily's in her room," Emma said as she closed the door behind him. "She knows you're here, but I told her she didn't have to come out right away." Alex nodded again. He couldn't stop scanning the room, absorbing all the small details that screamed of a life that had gone on without him. A photograph on a shelf caught his eye. It was of Emma and Lily, taken on what looked like a picnic, both of them laughing, wind in their hair. He felt a sting in his chest that was part awe, part guilt. Emma sat down across from him and motioned for him to do the same. "I'm not going to ask you to explain anything," she said calmly. "I don't want apologies or speeches. I just want you to be honest about why you're really here." He didn't hesitate. "Because I saw her eyes," he said softly, "and they were mine. And it destroyed me to realize that I've missed everything. Her first words, her first steps, her first day of school. And because I remembered the way you looked at me, how much you trusted me, and how fast I threw that away. I can't fix the past, Emma. I know that. But I can be better from now on. I want to know her. And I want her to know me not as a stranger, but as her father." Emma studied him for a long time. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she was listening. That was more than he'd hoped for. Then, from down the hallway, small footsteps echoed. Lily appeared at the edge of the doorway, holding a stuffed rabbit in one arm and wearing purple leggings with a faded superhero shirt. Her hair was slightly messy, as if she'd been lying down, and her eyes, those unmistakable eyes, looked at him not with fear, but with cautious curiosity. "Hi," she said quietly. Alex stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. He crouched to her eye level, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hi, Lily. I'm really glad to see you." She clutched her bunny a little tighter but took a small step forward. "Did you bring me something?" He blinked, surprised, and smiled faintly. "Actually, yes. I brought a box of things, but I left it in the car. Books and puzzles, and well, I didn't know what you liked, so I got a bit of everything." She nodded like this was acceptable and looked back at Emma, who gave her a reassuring nod. After a pause, Lily crossed the room slowly and sat down near the coffee table. She pulled out a crayon and started coloring again, saying nothing else. But when she began humming quietly to herself, it was a melody Alex recognized, a lullaby he used to hum to Emma years ago. She must have sung it to Lily. His throat tightened. Emma leaned in quietly. "That's a good sign," she whispered. She doesn't hum when she's uncomfortable. He swallowed hard. She's incredible. Yes, she is. Alex didn't push. He sat nearby and watched her color, asked her a few soft questions, her favorite animals, her favorite color, and listened with careful attention when she answered. Slowly, her words became more confident, and her gaze lingered on him a little longer each time. At one point, she handed him a crayon and said, "Color this part. Not out of the lines, okay?" It wasn't much, but it was more than he could have ever asked for on the first day. They spent an hour together, and when Emma said it was time for Lily's afternoon snack, the little girl stood and stretched, then turned to Alex. "You can come back," she said matter-of-factly. "But next time, bring something for Mr. Bunny too." Alex smiled, unable to stop the warmth from rising in his chest. "I promise." As Emma walked him to the door, she didn't say much. But before he left, she looked at him, her voice softer than it had been all afternoon. "She likes you," she said. "That doesn't mean she trusts you. Yet, but she likes you." He nodded. "I'll learn the rest. However long it takes." Emma didn't smile. But this time, she didn't look away either. As he stepped into the rain and walked back to his car, soaked and cold, Alex felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. Real hope. The following weeks unfolded quietly, but with a sense of purpose that Alex had never experienced before. His days, once filled with conference calls, high-stakes meetings, and dinner events hosted in glass towers, were now shaped by slower rhythms. He began adjusting everything: his schedule, his expectations, and most of all, his definition of success. Mornings were spent reviewing company updates remotely, but by early afternoons, he was often at Emma's building, sometimes just for a short visit, other times for a full evening with Lily. Each time, he arrived with something different: a board game, a science experiment kit, a new storybook, or simply himself, ready to sit on the carpet and color outside the lines if that's what Lily wanted. Emma remained cautious, yet something unspoken began shifting between them. She no longer hovered in the same room every minute of his visits, occasionally trusting him to spend time with Lily alone while she ran errands or read quietly in another room. Their conversations grew longer too, moving from logistics about Lily's schedule and food preferences to small memories, fragments of the life they had once shared. Alex didn't push. He knew that whatever closeness was returning had to come naturally, and not because he hoped to erase the past. There were things that couldn't be undone, but there were also things that could be rebuilt, brick by careful brick. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in his lap while they watched an animated movie, Emma came into the living room and stood silently in the doorway. She watched the scene for a moment, her arms crossed over her chest, not as a barrier, but as someone holding something close. When Alex gently shifted Lily onto the couch and covered her with a blanket, Emma finally spoke. "She's never fallen asleep like that with anyone but me," she said softly. Alex didn't look up right away. He adjusted the blanket over his daughter's shoulders and whispered, "I didn't know how much I needed this. Until it happened." Emma sat down on the edge of the chair across from him, her expression unreadable. "You know, I used to rehearse what I'd say if you ever came back. I imagined yelling, throwing things, telling you how much I hated you." He looked at her now, the pain of her words sharp, but deserved. "But when it finally happened, I couldn't do any of that," she continued, "because you weren't who I remembered. You were tired, lost. And you looked at her like you'd seen a miracle. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know what I was missing," he said. "But the moment I saw her, I couldn't unsee it. Everything else fell apart after that." Emma nodded slowly. Then she reached into the side table drawer and handed him a small envelope. "This was the letter I wrote the night I found out I was pregnant. I never sent it. I thought you didn't deserve to read it. But I'm giving it to you now because I think you're trying." He took the letter with trembling hands but didn't open it. Instead, he held it against his chest. "Thank you." That night, when he returned home, he didn't go straight to bed. He sat at his desk, the unopened envelope still in his hands. And then, for the first time since his world had turned upside down, he made a decision that didn't revolve around Emma or Lily, but something larger. He would tell the truth. All of it. The next morning, he reached out to a journalist he trusted, not a tabloid writer. but someone who had followed his career since the early days. They met in a quiet office, away from cameras and glamour. When the recorder clicked on, Alex began speaking with a calm, honest voice that surprised even himself. He told the entire story. How he had once been in love with someone who grounded him. How that love had been torn apart by a lie he had accepted too quickly. He spoke about betrayal, about weakness disguised as pride, and about the child he hadn't known he had. He described the moment that child stood in a chapel and stopped the most important decision he almost made, and how that interruption was not the end of something, but the beginning of everything that truly mattered. When the article was published, the response was louder than he expected. Some criticized him, saying he should have kept it private. Others admired the vulnerability, but for him, it wasn't about headlines, it was about accountability. He wanted Emma to know that he wasn't hiding from the truth anymore. He wanted Lily one day to read those words and understand that her father hadn't simply shown up when it was convenient, but had changed because of her. That night, he didn't check the news. Instead, he went to Emma's apartment with Lily's favorite snacks and a sketch pad he had picked up because she'd once mentioned wanting to try drawing real animals. When Lily opened the door, her arms immediately wrapped around his legs. Emma stood behind her with a subtle smile, small but real. "You read the article?" he asked gently. "I did," she replied. "It was brave." "No," he said. "It was overdue." And in that quiet exchange, with no grand declarations or promises, something between them began to heal. Not completely. Not all at once. But something fragile and new had taken root in the space that was once filled with silence. Spring returned, like a whisper, soft and steady, as if the world itself was ready to begin again. Trees bloomed with delicate pink and white flowers, and the city, so often cold and hurried, seemed to move a little slower beneath the gentle sunlight. For Alex, this season meant more than just warmer days and lighter jackets. It marked one full year since the moment everything had unraveled, and also one full year since something far more important had begun to take root, a life, a bond, a family he never expected to reclaim. In the months that had followed his public confession and his steady, patient re-entry into Emma and Lily's lives, the broken pieces of the past had not vanished, but they had begun to fit together differently. He never tried to erase what happened. He didn't ask Emma to forget. Instead, he showed up, over and over, through scraped knees, school projects, late-night calls about fevers, and weekends spent making pancakes with too much flour. He was there when Lily had her first stage fright at a school play, and also when she won her first art contest. He listened, not only to Lily's endless thoughts about dolphins and space, but also to Emma's silences, which over time became conversations again. Then laughter, then something like trust. Their rhythm had changed. There was no label, no announcement. Alex never pressured Emma to define what they were now. They were parenting together, yes, but they were also healing side by side, slowly rediscovering the versions of themselves that once fit together so naturally. There were nights when she would stay on the porch with him after Lily had gone to bed, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. And then, one night she had reached out and simply taken his hand. No words, just quiet acceptance. It was the beginning of something that neither of them rushed, because they both knew how fragile and precious it was. It wasn't until Lily asked the question directly that things began to change again. They were walking through the park one afternoon, just the three of them, and Lily had paused beneath a blooming cherry blossom tree. She looked up at both of them with those sharp blue eyes and asked, "If you both love me, and you both love each other, then why aren't we a family like my friend Mia's parents?" Alex and Emma exchanged a glance, one of those long, quiet conversations only people with history could have without saying a word. It wasn't that they didn't have an answer. It was that the answer had finally become clear. Later that night, in their now familiar routine, Emma curled up beside him on the couch, Lily asleep in the next room. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel the steady calm of her breathing. He turned slightly and whispered, "Do you think we've waited long enough?" Emma didn't move right away. Then, without looking at him, she replied, "I think we were never really apart. We were just waiting to meet again, as who we are now." It wasn't dramatic. There were no candlelit proposals, no grand romantic speeches. It was simply a conversation, followed by a decision that felt like the most natural thing in the world. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon in early June, in a quiet garden surrounded by only their closest friends and family, Alex stood once again in a wedding suit. But this time there were no photographers, no corporate expectations, no glittering stage to impress. Just sunlight filtering through leaves, the soft rustle of summer air, and a little girl in a floral dress running circles around the chairs as guests laughed. Emma wore a simple ivory dress, her hair down and no veil. She didn't need one. Her eyes told the whole story, and when she walked down the garden path toward him, holding Lily's hand, Alex felt something he had never truly felt, not at his first almost wedding, not even during the height of his career. He felt peace, not the absence of struggle, but the quiet knowledge that everything they had endured had led them here, to this moment. When the officiant asked if he was ready, Alex didn't hesitate. He looked at Emma not as the woman he had once lost, but as the woman who had chosen to let him try again, and he said, with absolute clarity, "I do." Lily stood between them as they exchanged vows, holding both of their hands. She had asked to be part of the ceremony, and they had agreed without question. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Lily was the first to cheer. She wrapped her arms around both of them and shouted, "We're a family now." There were no fireworks, no press coverage, no dramatic send-off, just an evening of laughter, dancing under string lights, and a picnic-style dinner that felt more honest and joyful than any five-star reception could have. Later that night, when they returned home, Lily curled up between them on the bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes half closed from exhaustion and happiness. Emma turned toward Alex in the dim light, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what the best part is?" she asked. He looked at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What?" "We didn't get back the life we lost. We created something better." And in that quiet, ordinary room filled with extraordinary love, Alex realized that she was right. Some stories don't end. They begin again, rewritten by truth, redemption, and the courage to choose each other, not for what once was, but for everything that still could be. This story, at its heart, is not just about love lost and found, it's about redemption earned. What makes the ending powerful isn't the happy ever after in the traditional sense, but the quiet, hard-won peace that only comes when people face their failures without excuses. Alex doesn't magically fix the past, he carries its weight and chooses to grow from it. Emma doesn't forgive because she's soft, she forgives because she's strong enough to see sincerity and change. And Lily, unknowingly, becomes the bridge between what was broken and what's possible. The ending works because it's rooted in emotional truth, that real love isn't just about passion or fate, but about showing up, day after day, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Their family doesn't form from a fairy tale, it rises from scars, from second chances, from a choice to rebuild. And that, to me, is far more meaningful than perfection.